It's Saga Saturday. We're live. Today we're joined. Hello. I became the person doing the intro very suddenly, and here I am. So I'm Bersi and Røstad, and I'm joined here with Kinehild and our guest, Jarl Thorfinn. And today we're going to talk about Hervarar Saga og Heiðreks, which I put on the back so you can see how that's spelled. So today Ulla is not with us, taking a little break, a little vacation, but we're gonna talk all about this sort of staple saga. This is an older one that many people read. Oddly enough, this is my first time reading it, and I didn't even finish before today. But it's great. It's got some sections that we've talked about, sort of touched on in the past, about this this figure of Hervör, one of the Hervors of this saga, who goes a Viking and becomes a highwayman, takes on this differently gendered role, and then we're gonna go all into the rest of the saga too, because that just happens at the beginning, and there's all sorts of stuff. Tolkien really drew a lot of inspiration from different aspects of this saga, so we're going to talk about that. And yeah, does everyone else want to introduce yourselves?
That was a good introduction. My name is Damm Kinehild. I do this because I really like dead language stuff, especially Germanic dead languages. They are my jam. And so having the opportunity to talk about all of this stuff, because anytime you talk about language, you have to talk about the culture that it's part of, because the two inform each other absolutely. So getting to talk about all this fun stuff with my fellow nerds is just the highlight of my week. So that's me. And we have here our special guest, Thorfinn, who can talk about his own self.
Yeah, I've been doing it. That's one of my favorite topics. I just am really happy to be here. I'm Jarl Thorfinn from the West Kingdom, and I have not read this saga either, actually. And so it kind of was one of those things where I was like, when I got asked to be on this, I was like very nervous, and I said, oh, yeah. And then it's also kind of in my wheelhouse because this is a translation by Christopher Tolkein. And I'm a little bit of a Tolkien nerd. I basically have every book he ever wrote. So, but there is some reference in this saga that will actually point to The Hobbit and things like that. So you'll see how this kind of did move into what later on became kind of modern fantasy. So, okay, I look forward to chopping it up with you guys.
All right, well, let's start with a little summary, a little bit about sort of the history of the saga and a little summary. Bersi, do you want to start, or do you want me to?
You go ahead. I don't know what you want to hit first.
So we have 3 versions of this saga that survive to us, and none of them are complete. So any translation of it kind of mixes and matches the 3. These are referred to as the H manuscript, the R manuscript, and the U manuscript. They're all believed to have come from a single original called A, but we have no extant version of A. And then the relationship between the 3 and any intermediary saga, versions, is kind of a subject of debate.
As are all manuscripts always.
Right, this is completely normal with codicology. Tolkien identifies H and, how does he do it? He says, I think H and U are the closest related, and R. I probably already messed that up. Anyway, let's ignore that.
He tends to, just looking at the notes, the footnotes, he tends to put H and U together, and then R is a separate.
Yeah, so the oldest manuscript version is from the Hauksbok, which is dated probably the very beginning of the 14th century. 1304 to 1310 is the narrowest date range that I've seen. It was either written by a guy named Hauker Erlandsson, or it was compiled by him or owned by him. So it's called Hauker's book. And it appears to be an abridgment of an intermediary version. So it's got a little bit less material than the other two. The R manuscript, the R version, survives in a vellum copy in the Royal Library at Copenhagen. Probably the most conservative version of the three, retaining the most of the original saga. Unfortunately, it ends part of the way through what's called Hlodskvida, which is the story of the battle between the Goths and the Huns. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, because that battle is very ingrained in early Germanic poetry and sort of their cultural awareness. That battle was a major turning point. If you study Gothic history, the Goths and the Huns are forever, like, it's a whole moment. It's very much the sort of Bloods and the Crips of the early Germanic period. And then you have the U version. This is a paper copy. So it's not an incunabula, but it's a paper manuscript dating mid-17th century. It's held at the Uppsala University Library. And what I really enjoyed was one of the articles that I read sort of dismisses this as full of manifest textual errors. He's just like, this is a hot mess. Like, but it's interesting in that it is related to the H version, but is longer. So where the H version may be a sort of an abridgment of this older non-surviving copy, the U version contains some of that missing information. So we mentioned the relationship between these three are kind of fraught with question marks, but we do know that it was probably not written all as one chunk. So the story of the Goths and the Huns, the Hlodskvida, is regarded to be among the oldest of the Eddic poems, though it doesn't survive quite in that same chunk anywhere else. Its language use and its structure indicates its age as very, very antiquated compared to the rest of the story. The other older chunk is probably Hervarar.
Hervarar Kviða.
Thank you. You get into the R's and it's just like R. Like, I just keep wanting to go.
Can I make a quick linguistic note? Yeah. Just to clear up any confusion about why we have all this R going on here. And you'll see it actually in my name as well, Bersi Edvardarsson. One of the very common ways to make a masculine word possessive, a genitive, is rather than putting an S at the end, which you also see, right? In Heiðreks, this is also possessive. So it's Hervör and Heiðreks saga, right? So Heiðreks has an S at the end, but Hervarar, feminine nouns also sometimes get the AR at the end too. If they've got an O, it's a whole thing. They end with an AR. And so this is actually just take that last R sound and make it into like, oh, that's an S in my head. So Hervarars Kviða is just Hervör's Kviða, which is a kind of poem. And that might be able to get rid of the extra syllables, the repeated R.
I think I just get excited with the R sound. It's like, R, pirates, right? So I just want to keep going. But anyway, so this is the Hervarar Kviða is when she's calling out to Angantyr and she's raising him from the dead, which we will of course talk about because how can we not? And that's also believed to be older than the bulk of the saga, though not nearly as old as Hlodskvida. So it's a younger chunk of poetry that, and the argument here is that there's a character who's referenced only in that part of the story named Froðmar, who's connected sort of structurally to some other sagas of an older date. So the theory is this chunk may be related to those older sagas, at least like in its structure. That was the article I was trying to power through before we started. So unfortunately, my comprehension of it was but that was in the conclusions. So I'm pretty sure that was an important takeaway. Bersi, you want to go through just for the story generally?
Yeah. And I'll be real honest. This always I found in when I was, talking with professors in school, it was always best to just get it right out of the way that I did not finish this saga last night. but I'm going to talk about the parts that I did read. So the general summary, as far as I could kind of see where it was going, also with sort of the second half, I think really or the second whole portion, I think most of the saga is about Heiðrek, but then there's this beginning section about Hervör. So first we get introduced to the through line of the whole saga, which is Tyrfinger. That is like the god Tyr, and finger like finger, although drop the E. And this is a magical sword that it was forged by some dwarves, I believe, right? Sigurdlami, or
yeah, it was Dvalin, I think, and Durin were the two dwarves, I think, that made it.
Yes.
Yeah, Durin definitely shows, or Dvalin shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Durin is the other one. And the king basically catches them and forces them to make a magical sword. And and not uncommon to dwarves fucking with people. They can't just make a magical sword because they're pissed that they're forced to do something, so they curse it. And
right,
that's a theme, I think, throughout the entire rest of the saga is, of course, this 3 curses on the sword.
yes, this very cursed thing. And so the sword, in addition to having magical properties, like it's like on fire, it sort of like beams with light and blaze of the sun and all this stuff. But every time the sword is drawn, it must kill.
Right.
And it must be resheathed with the blood still wet on it. And then was there a third?
Because gross.
Yeah, which my memory
Which is gross, yeah.
You don't want to leave that. The 5 seconds that I took kendo, you had to snap your sword at the end because you wanted to
blood
off.
Yeah.
So
You're right. But also another thing about the sword that I remember was that it basically never misses.
Right.
So you become suddenly a super warrior if you have it, but know that with these curses that it's potentially your downfall.
Right.
And it's a great thing to have. Like, everyone wants the magic sword, but they know they get it. At least they should know that they're screwed somehow.
Right. Because and so the people are just cutting down. Yeah, with when we get to let's see who had it first, because it was the berserkers. There's these 12 berserkers, the sons of Arngrimr, and who are being led by Angantyr. And you're gonna hear those some of these names quite a bit.
Yeah.
They sort of go in this order of sons and daughters being named the same things in generation after generation. So I think, what was it? It's first Angantyr to Hervör.
No, I think that's the opposite, isn't it?
No,
Hervör.
it's Angantyr, Hervör, Heiðrek, Angantyr, Hervör.
Right.
Yeah. And it's great because both Hervors are described as being warrior women, skaldmer, in the saga. So it's just like, it's the same family again.
Right.
But
it's like they just said, screw it, let's just keep going with this.
Yeah.
We like those last characters. I don't want to come up with new characters.
Well, it's interesting to me that they don't get conflated in the story. Like you maintain these 2 separate generations of Angantyr, who's sort of a war-heavy, kind of slightly cursed king, and his daughter Hervör, who just really wants to hit things. That's her life goal. And so you don't see those 2 generations collapse into one in any of these versions. Like they maintain their separation. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because often you'll see they'll just be like, fuck, we don't know, man. Just
the Angantyr character, that name comes up at least 3 different people in the saga. So I know that there's like, so it becomes tricky as we go forward to remember.
Yeah.
I started in my notes, I would put a 1, 2, and a 3 to try and keep track, because I was like,
one of them dies, though, at least as like a young kid.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
one of the sons, Angantyr, he just dies, so then we don't have to deal with him.
Right. Fortunately, they all die off ahead of time. A lot of it's just like that guy died, and they're like, well, let's use the name again.
there's these 12 berserkers. They're all sons of a king, Arngrimr, and they are just known as the worst guys ever. They're bullies, but they're extraordinarily strong, right? They're berserkers, they can whip themselves into a battle frenzy and, kill people very effectively. And they basically just go around strong-arming people into giving them whatever they want, including like Angantyr gets like a wife from somebody.
Yeah. So what predates the fight, this holmgang that eventually they're going to end up on this island, is one of the sons of Arngrim sees this woman. He swears an oath at Yule, which we've talked about previously. Oaths given at Yule are particularly oathy. So he swears this oath at Yule that he will achieve this woman as a wife and no other. And so then he goes to the court, and she's a princess, naturally. She has to be a princess, right? We talked about this last time with the bridal quest. She has to be someone of exalted value. So he goes to get this wife, and she is sort of vaguely, she's like, I mean, whatever. But then this other guy comes along and he's like, I have served in your court for a long time. I'm a good person. Give me
better than this awful dude.
Right. And so then she's like, well, I know this guy, and at least I know him, and I've only heard bad things about this other guy. So that's who I prefer. But then they, of course, fight over her. And I think Angantyr is the holmgang might be the fight, but Angantyr serves as champion for his brother, who wants this princess, and they end up winning the princess. And then Angantyr just sort of gets married to a previously unmentioned woman, and that's the relationship.
No wonder I was so confused.
Yeah, okay. like Angantyr doesn't marry the princess. He marries, I don't know, we'll call her the princess's friend. And that is the marriage that produces Hervör. And basically,
that's very interesting that they still have the marriage quest format, and they allow Angantyr to like do the heroic consent thing, but it's not even for the right woman. Like, and then they just narratively have to just like, here you go, here's a wife.
Can I throw in real quick a weird thing about the berserkers is that they're all brothers as well.
Yeah,
like the 12 berserkers is a common kind of saga item, right? For some reason, a lot of kings have these guards or things like that of 12, but in this particular case, they're all brothers. And like you said, they're just known for being the biggest jerks to ever live, right? Everywhere they go, they sow strife everywhere and problems. And I think it's an interesting commonality, but that came up again, and I was like, wow, they really love this 12 berserker thing.
Yeah. 12 assholes.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. 12 has this sort of, this is not me getting into numerology, but it has this sort of ancient magical, it's sort of one of those magical numbers, right? Like 7. And where 7 is 3 plus 4, 3 being sort of its own special number, same with 4. 12 is 3 times 4. You have like the 12 apostles. You have, I think Aannestad the Dane has like 12 followers that he's buried with.
Yeah,
that's a big maybe.
Prof. Cracky had 12 berserkers as well.
Yeah,
and including a super shape changer berserker.
Yeah, who's I love his family's name. That's
First name Bjarki.
Yeah, Bjarki. His mom's name is Bera and his dad's name is Björn. Yeah. Bear and Bear got together and had their son Bear Cub.
Yeah, baby bear. Yeah. I think he has a brother who's like half elk.
Yes, elk Frothy, and then he's
like a only from the waist down, and he's like 10 foot tall or something like that.
And then his next, he's got 2 older brothers. Elk Frothy's the oldest, and then the next one is Thorolf Houndsfoot, who's totally normal, just a big dude.
Houndsfoot.
Yeah.
I remember Elk Frothy because we got in a debate about it last year on Facebook. Yeah. I think Darcy, and I was like trying to Photoshop a half man, and you're like, no, he's not a moose centaur kind of person. It's more like just they knocked out the middle set of legs, so it's just like
he's like a satyr, but with elk legs.
Yeah.
Right, that was what I imagined. Was just like think like back in.
It'd be even better though if he was only elk from the waist up. Right? Like the bottom and the elk top, like just really dumb looking.
And I'm just wondering, like if he's got like hooves on the top part, you can't really like put on like clothes or anything. He's just running around naked with like. Okay, all right.
Yeah. Back to the story.
We just love our legendary sagas so much.
It's good times.
So just to like quickly get into like the actual meat of the saga, basically, the Angantyr uses Tyrfinger to like kill people, and it's great. He gets married and has a daughter named Hervör. I love your notes. She's a girl, sort of.
And he dies. So he dies.
And she never meets him. He dies before she's born or when she's very, very young, and she gets fostered by a king. So she's sort of like in role, she's kind of like a princess, but she's just sort of living in the court with the king, being raised there. It's a foster situation, so and she's known for like doing lots of fighting and riding, and
she's
and actually gets in trouble. Yeah,
she's a complete asshole too.
Yeah, she's also a huge dick.
Like a bandit.
And like she like gets caught. So people are like, maybe you should do some more embroidery actually. And she's like, no, I'm gonna be a highwayman. And she goes out and she like gets caught by like the king, like going around attacking people in the woods for their money, just for no reason. Like she doesn't need to be doing this. She's just doing it for fun. Later she like goes Viking.
So what kicks off her Viking is that the slaves who she has been the king's slaves who she has been an absolute horrible human being to, like the worst Karen at Starbucks kind of horrible human being, right?
Ooh, that's bad.
So she's been terrible to them, and they finally say, well, you're the daughter of a slave. Your father was no better than a pig herder. Yep. Which is interesting because that's also how they insulted William the Conqueror. Was they were like, your father was you're the grandson of a tanner, right? So anyway, that's not connected at all. It's just a funny thing to me. So they insult her, and she finally, and this is where I think the poetry kind of kicks. Well, no, there's poetry in the Oddvar Odds chunks too, but she finally goes to her foster father, and she's like, "What's up, right? Am I who I've always thought I was, somebody important?" Or am I really just this base-born girl, daughter of a pig farmer? And that's when she is informed your father was Angantyr, who's this great warrior, but also kind of a dick. And it's something that one of the articles I read noted was that this sort of within a family line, this bad attitude thing is a common thing in sagas, right? You have Skallagrim.
Yeah, I was gonna say
like Skallagrim's son Egil. Bad attitude.
Yeah.
Right?
And that one's I love that particular descent from Kveldulf to Skallagrim to Egil, because not only are they, and this is very similar in a, like bad attitude and also being a berserker or something similar, like they go hand in hand. Kveldulf, right? Kveldulf evening or night wolf. Like, how much more werewolf McWerewolf can you get, right? And so
werewolf McFurry pants.
Yeah, really. Like, so Night Wolf over here, who's a big grumpy man, big strong dude. He's super ugly. He's an amazing warrior, and then like it's heavily implied that he's just full on berserker. And he's the guy who, like, at 80 years old, literally like a week before he dies, takes his giant. It's specified that it is a 2-headed axe, and like cuts somebody down to like their neck through their head, and then as he tries to get the axe out, he ends up flipping them over up and over the side of the ship that they were on. Anyway, I just love that scene. And Kveldulf's son Skallagrim is slightly less like monstrous. He's slightly less of a berserk kind of figure, but he's also still very like strong and also incredibly ugly. And then their son Egil, who's also still very ugly and strong, is even less monstrous and now has this added element of poetry. He becomes a very Odinic figure. I could go on forever. I love Egil's Saga. But yeah, the same idea of like the generational like through line of both this wildness, being a berserker, and like being just a big asshole.
Well, I mean, think about it. I mean, having a person that could, for any perceived slight, wig out and kill half the village is probably a shitty person to have around.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I mean, even when Eric the Viking, the guys, the dad's always telling the one berserk, you know, hey, you can't berserk right now, you know, and you know, like you're gonna wear yourself out and all this stuff. So I mean, they would just be great to have in combat, but the rest of the time they would suck.
Yeah.
Right?
And that happens in this too, right? When the berserks finally get got, it's because they berserked.
They wore themselves out. Yeah.
They wore themselves out, and then they were too weak to deal with literally just two guys.
What ends up happening is there's this kind of a section of it where they go off to kind of just cause problems and get revenge on this person for the duel and the bride and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And there's a bit of a kind of a prophecy of their deaths that is mentioned in kind of the poetic part. And then, like, for instance, I think Angertyr takes 16 wounds. No, Hjalmar takes 16 wounds. And by the way, this is one of the first Hjalmars, guys. There will be others in the story as well. So brace yourself. But so, like, Hjalmar actually kills Angertyr, even though he's got Tyrfing, the magical sword, right? But again, the cursed magical sword, you can have this awesome thing, but your success is going to be limited by the curse, right? Mm-hmm. And I read some sources that say there's 3 great evils that it does, right? And so it has to, you know, you'll find that as that goes forward. But so they end up kind of having like a cool death speech, you know, and which is kind of fun. Who doesn't love a good death speech, right?
If I remember right, we've got some of that great that we've talked about before, that sort of Viking humor, where
right.
Like those snappy lines you got to give at the end of your life, and you're just like, oh no, I've probably got it highlighted because it was a good line. But it's like that spears are in fashion this year kind of.
Yeah.
A good line. I love that one. So there's also a guy in the section of the poem that has a magic shirt too, he has a magical bulletproof magic shirt.
A very lightweight silken. They describe it as being like silken.
Yeah.
And this gets the whole story of this particular magic shirt is from a different saga, and so it's just sort of referencing it offhand, like, oh, you know this character already. He's in Orvar Odd's saga, I believe, right?
Yep. His name is Arrow Odd.
Arrow Odd, yeah. And so I don't know that story.
I
don't know what happens there, but it is very, if you're like, that kind of sounds like mithril mail. Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly right.
It's Hjalmar who has the dying speech, and he gives this whole long dying speech, but the end is, from the high treetop hurries the raven, from the east flying the eagle his escort, food for the eagle I find for the last time, he shall make his meal on my blood now. And it's just that, like, so bad. So it wasn't humor, but it was still that, like,
pretty badass.
I'm super chill with my death. The eagle comes, you know, ravens, very Odin bird. I don't know if eagles have that same connotation, but I would assume that there is
eagles
some.
Don't have a very Odin connotation, but any carrion or bird is going to be used. They're very. This seems to me more of just a typical poetic reference of just like, I am the feast of ravens. I am the feast of these carrion birds who are going, you know.
But he's just.
I've fallen valiantly in battle, and now my body becomes food for you.
Yeah, exactly. And he also does like he requests that guy to take out his wife's ring, take his wedding ring to his wife, and like so it's probably like a side quest here that you guys could with downloadable content get to.
So yeah, so there's this home gang, and then we have Hervör, and Hervör goes on all kinds of adventures. She gets in. You would start to talk about that, Bersi. I'm sorry. I'm like,
oh yeah. I mean, they're very. It's like all one right after another. It's like a paragraph in the saga. But she just she becomes a Viking. She takes on a new name, Hervar, which is basically all the same name. But
yeah, she really assumes like a male figure here.
Yeah, she puts on the
talk about it like that. She even like disguises herself believably as a male warrior.
Right. And like
just thinks she's a male warrior.
well, so there's a part of me that's curious because a lot of descriptions of sort of male Vikings are there's beards. Beards are a very common, like nickname Skeggy or a given name Skeggy, which means beard or bearded. And clearly as a woman, she can't grow one. So there's some identifying way. I mean, maybe she tacks one on with spirit gum, but I doubt it. Right? Like
in
yeah, like hooked over the ears.
No, hey man, I'm gonna tell you, Kinehild, not every Viking can grow a beard till sometimes they're in their 40s.
Fair enough.
They would have no beard.
And I would say
just as good warrior.
Probably like so while I've seen it in some sagas where like people are making fun of someone specifically because they don't have a beard, like usually it's like that is the insult you throw at someone who's already proven themselves not to be worthy of being insulted in this way, right? Like it's not simply the fact that you can't grow a beard. It isn't like we're just poking fun at you in the playground, haha, you don't have facial hair. It's like you've proven yourself to be cowardly in some way, and so we are going to point out this emasculating feature. And so I don't know. I feel like it wouldn't be that strange. Like, okay, this person just doesn't grow a beard as easily, but if you're still like super badass, super fodder, you can overcome this lack of facial hair, right?
Is it also like an insult about being too young too? Like
yeah, too young.
I think there's a connection with that kind of the lack beard. Like, why should we trust you? Because you're not even an adult, really.
Right. You only just became an adult. You're 12.
Yeah, you don't have the experience of a warrior, so because you don't have a beard.
Right.
That's pretty a common idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Absolutely.
So she eventually joins these Vikings, and eventually she becomes the captain of the Vikings. So not only is she a Viking, but she's like a super Viking. And then she finds out she may have already known where her father was buried, and she's like,
yeah, she wants to go and get a quest to get their treasure.
Right. Mm-hmm. So at the sword, she wants Tyrfing. Yeah. And so she goes to Samsi where her father had died, and he was buried in this mound. And she starts this. She calls him up, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later.
It's all of the berserkers are buried in this mound.
Yes, all the brothers,
all 12. Yeah.
And it's a very haunted island, and her companions are like, "We out." Right, like they're not going anywhere near this.
But I don't even want to land on this island. She like has to like convince them to set anchor so that she can row out by herself.
She has to go by herself. Yeah.
So we'll get into that whole chunk of it a little bit later. But basically, she argues with her dad a bit magically because he's dead, but that's fine. It doesn't matter. Gets the sword, leaves, goes to visit another court. Hangs out there for a bit, but then her gender is revealed. And so at that point, she's like, "Whoop, got to give all this up." Goes back to her foster father's court, bringing a husband with her, and takes up embroidery.
Yeah, literally. Always embroidery.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find that sentence. Unfortunately, right now I'm scrolling through a billion lines of
while you're doing that, I gotta tell you, I love this bit about the barrows where they go and she has this whole thing. My notes are pretty funny because I was pretty tired when I wrote some of these. There's one that just goes ghosts, but because they come out and it's all like fire behind them,
the mouth of hell is open.
Yeah, he gets up and walks out of this fire thing, and and he's like kind of arguing with her about her doing just her doom is failing because of her evil deeds and things like that.
Well, and he informs her that if she takes this sword,
that's right,
this sword will be not just her doom, but the doom of her whole family, his whole family.
Yeah.
And he's like, you can't do this. And she says, fuck it. I'm do what I want. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
Yeah, exactly. I love that, So.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of notes later about.
It says, you don't want sword for reals, is my note. Yeah. You don't want sword for reals.
You really don't want this.
Like there's a bunch of really interesting, like she takes on this very liminal aspect as she goes. So she keeps passing in between sort of this barrier. Like we've talked previously about how masculine feminine really isn't the dichotomy that we should be considering here. It's Vater Blauder. But she keeps kind of passing between that Vater Blauder line in her life. Like she's explicitly female, which is typically coded as Blauder, but then she undertakes all these Vater activities. But then she passes all the way into Vater when she becomes Hervard, and it uses when she is Hervarther, it uses the masculine pronouns.
Yeah.
And so after she finds out who her father is, after she takes up this quest and dresses, previously it's sort of, I think, assumed that she's dressing in male clothing and running around causing trouble. Personally, having worn long skirts, I wouldn't run through the forest in them. It's a real pain in the bum, but teach their own. But so she takes this, she passes through this barrier, and then she kind of passes back when she meets her father, because she announces herself, I am Hervör, your daughter.
Right. And that whole exchange, it uses feminine pronouns.
Yeah.
Hon vad, she asked, all these things and stuff.
And anyway, I have a whole thing I want to say about that, but let's probably wrap up the summary first so that we can.
I want to make a very quick note in the line of when she gets discovered, her gender is sort of discovered. It's really weird. And then she goes back to her foster father and settles down. It is directly in response to her using Tearfinger. It is she's just hanging out in the hall. Some random guy.
Oh yeah, that's
right. Tearfinger. And so the sword has been drawn. She hears this happen, turns around, grabs it from him, and just kills him.
Yeah, chops his head off, I think.
Yeah. And then, struck off the head of the man who had drawn it. After that, Hervard that once went out. And then the king's men were like, we have to go take revenge. But the king spoke to them and told them to be still. For your vengeance on this man, he said, will seem smaller than you now think, because it is my guess that he is a woman. But I think that with that weapon which she wields, her slaying will be dearly bought by every man of you. And then it just says, Hervor went off to join the Vikings and was out raiding for a time. And when she grew weary of that, she went to Bjarmar the Jarl and settled down to find work with her hands. Many tales were then told of her beauty. Now that she's back in the bower doing her embroidery, she just got tired of Viking, went home, started doing embroidery. And from that point on, tales were told of her beauty, which I think is a really interesting. She is now no longer being told tales of her valor. She's left that realm. It's gone now. And we're going to focus on this other aspect. She
also appears to have left behind the just bad attitude that marked her youth, right? Like she was, everybody talked about what an annoying brat she was. Right. She goes off of Vikings, she gets the sword, she gets discovered, she comes home, and all of a sudden she's beautiful. And typically, I think in these stories, she's beautiful and she's a right royal pain in the ass are not typically conflated, right? Like they're kind of two different experiences. So anyway, Hervor settles down. She bears a son, Heiðrek, who then gets into, he grows up, he takes a kingdom. He gets into a poem riddle contest with this guy, Gestam Blindy.
Wait, can we first just mention the advice that he was like? Because I feel like the structure of the rest of the saga is just him he gets advice. He gets advice when he first becomes king.
From like from an old king, right? Like he kind of gets adopted by an old king, right? Who doesn't have a son, so there's no one to inherit. Is that correct? If I remember.
No, yes, he does, but he kills his brother, and then he is exiled, and in his exile, that's when he goes to find the old king and gets adopted. But at his exile, his father gives him these three pieces of advice. Yeah. Don't now I'm not going to remember them.
Yeah. Wait, I think I have.
It's like don't let your wife go home to visit her family too much. Don't be kind to people who have.
Oh, I got it. I found it.
Sweet.
That he give no help to a man who has slain his lord. Counsel him second, never to deliver a man who has murdered his fellow. Third, not to allow his wife to be often visiting her kinsfolk, even though she entreat him. Fourth, not to be late abroad with his mistress. Fifth, not to ride his best horse when he is in a great hurry. And sixth, never to foster the son of a man more powerful than he is himself. And like the rest of the saga is Heiðrek summarily going out of his way to break every single piece of advice.
Yeah.
Do the exact opposite of all of the advice his dad had just given him, upon killing his brother, who was like the more loved, the better son of the two, and who had just been really nice to him. And he did it by accident. He just threw a rock and didn't even know who he was throwing it at, and like killed his own brother. It was just dumb. Man,
this is one of those things where we talked about the bad attitude kind of thing too.
Yeah.
Right. Is that he's an example of that carrying forward.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of brutishly violent and kind of a dick. And so like you said, that he didn't know who that was and just throws a big rock, and happens to be his own brother, of course. Duh. And right. He's like, I'm in a saga. I should have known it was my brother. but yeah, so.
What kills me is, so you have the paragraph where he gets the advice. There's a paragraph where his mother, Hervör, gives him turfing, kind of explains the problem behind it. Like, don't be stupid with the sword. Gives him a mark of gold. And then the next paragraph is he travels for a while, and he met some men, one of whom was bound. They asked each other for news, and Heiðrek asked why the man had done, who was treated this way. And they answered that he had betrayed his lord. And then Heiðrek asked if they would accept ransom for him. So like 2 paragraphs later, he is immediately like, my father said, don't ever be nice to a guy who killed his lord. Well, I'm going to pay half of the money that I have in this world to set this man free. And then I'm just going to be like, no, why would you be loyal to me? You weren't loyal. And then like the next paragraph, he comes along somebody who had murdered his comrade, and they're like, I'll pay the rest of the money that I have in this world if you'll set him free. I don't want him as a follower. He will do me no good, but let me pay this.
just to spite dad. Honestly, it reminds me of this one Halloween. I was gonna go trick-or-treating with my friends, and we were just old enough to be going out, not being watched the whole time. We were just gonna be in our neighborhood, and we were gonna go out on our own. But my friend's mom was like, now only take candy or anything from people who are like in houses, like go up to their doors and like knock on the door, but like not from anyone in their car, not from anyone on the street. Just like stay away. Don't talk to strangers that are in their cars. Mostly was like the big one. Do not get any candy from strangers in cars. And we walk out of her house, and a fire truck pulls up to a stop, and a fireman leans out the side with a big old fire boot in his hand and says, do you want some happy Halloween? Do you want some candy? And so in full view of my friend's mom, we immediately just go up and take candy from the sky. I'm like, it's a fire truck.
Yeah, if you're a bad guy, that's a really hard kind of costume lure type idea, right? Like, I need to get 10 other dudes in a fire truck, then we can kidnap kids.
Right. It's so funny. Just like I was like, oh, I guess I am gonna take candy from strangers in cars today. This is that energy.
Yeah. So there's that whole business, and then sorry, the thing was just going to keep slipping off the back of my head. Eventually Heiðrek, he gets into this riddle contest. At the end, he utterly pisses off Odin because surprise, spoilers. Spoilers, at some point the riddler becomes Odin. Like it starts with a different guy, but then it like switches midstream.
Or it's before Gestumblindi ever goes. Like,
yeah,
there's a character named Gestumblindi who's just a normal guy, not Odin, who's like has to get judged. And one of the other options, if you don't want to get judged by these guys who are going to be really harsh, is you can like have a riddle battle with the king. And Gestumblindi is like not smart or strong or really like not gonna get a good thing out of this. And then this other guy shows up at his door and is like, "Hi, I'm Gestumblindi. Change clothes with me." And then this guy goes, and that's Odin.
Are we doing like a little bit of? Can we talk about parts? Or are we going to do that in a few minutes?
Well, we've been doing it both ways here. So
yeah,
go for it.
This guy, Gestumblindi is he's like a lord though, right? But he's an enemy of King Heiðrek, and so he realizes he can't get a fair trial, and he's not smart enough to do the riddles, and so what he decides to do is make a big sacrifice to Odin. And then coincidentally, bam, a couple minutes later, a dude knocks on the door and is like, "Hey, by the way, my name is also your name. And if you switch clothes with me, I'm willing to go do this riddle contest for you." And you're like, well, we know who that is, right? But like, you know, and imagine in the hall, everyone's like, "God, I wonder who that is." Right? You know,
I think it's so funny because like, it feels to me like the fact that the Lord's name is Gestumblindi is wild. That is the weirdest name ever for just some random Lord to have. So in my head, it's like this story, this is totally not verified by anything. This is just my feelings. This is one of those stories where it's like someone had the Gestumblindi exchange happening and then had to like sort of justify why he would be able to introduce himself in the hall as Gestumblindi, which Gestur means guest and Blindi means blind. And this is probably just sort of like an elision essentially of Gestur in Blindi, the blind guest.
Yeah.
So it just becomes altogether Gestumblindi, and that's a weird name for like just a lord to have, but makes perfect sense. Like Odin has already in other sagas calls himself the guest or like the wanderer, you know.
Like that's a big symbol for him, is to show up at your house and fuck with you to test your, you know, hospitality and things like that, which is huge, right? If you screw that up, Odin will basically ruin your household.
Right.
So, yeah, I thought that was a really funny part, is that the guy has nothing to do. He's like, well, shit, only thing I can really do is make a big sacrifice to Odin and hope he shows up and does this for me.
And then he does.
And he does, right? I was like, well, I'll thank you.
It's always good when somebody
how that worked out, right?
Right.
So there's this riddle contest, and at the end of the riddle contest, Heiðrek figures out who's telling the riddles, and he's like, "You asshole, Odin," which of course is the best way to reply to your to a divine presence. And Odin turns into a kestrel or some sort of hawk and goes to fly away, but Heiðrek strikes out with Tyrfing and cuts off the hawk's tail feathers, which is then promptly explained, well, this is why hawks all have short tail feathers.
Yeah.
A little bit of like
as if they had really long ones before that, right?
But this is now we know why. And Odin is like, that was mean. I didn't appreciate it. And so he proceeds to curse Heiðrek, and this leads to Heiðrek's untimely demise, leaving behind multiple children. And this whole time, by the way, Heiðrek really bad with women. He has like really bad with women. He has multiple wives, one of which is the daughter of the king of the Huns. And so he brings her to his court, he sleeps with her, and then he sends her home and later brings her back, which seems fine. But in the interim, she bears him a son. So in Tolkien's translation, his name is Hood, which Hervör appears to be sort of more correct. So so you have Hervör, who gets raised with the Huns, and then you have
hostage exchange almost.
Say that again.
It's almost like a hostage exchange, you know. It was pretty common in houses of the lords to do, you know, raise up someone else's kid.
Yeah,
right.
Except for there's relationship in that.
Yeah,
like if he's raised in his grandfather's hall.
That's right.
But anyway, so is raised with the Huns, and at this point, Heiðrek is sort of tied in with the Goths. So his son Angantur takes over the throne of the Goths, and this sets up the battle between the Goths and the Huns, which is that Högkvíða that we talked about at the beginning, that has that really ancient connection with Germanic culture, and sort of these ancient tales of these early Germanic exploits that are pre-writings, well before that, right? Like there's a bunch of debate about when the battle took place, or if it can be really associated with any one particular battle, or if it's just that cultural clash, or if it was even between Huns and Goths and not sort of Goths and other Goths.
Right. and this happens all the time with these legendary sagas, and like that's one of the things that sort of sets apart a legendary saga from like a Icelandic family saga or one of these other ones, is like the time period in which it is set. And this is all set in this sort of like legendary past that can encompass like 1,000 years of time. So that's why, like in, for instance, Volsunga saga, the most famous of the legendary sagas, arguably, with Sigurd and all of them, Brynhildr, we've got people like Jormunrekkr and Atli in the same place, even though like we have Jormunrekkr was probably a real person who lived, I can't remember when, but it was like they're like 300 plus years apart, Attila the Hun and this guy, but they all just sort of get condensed into one massive heroic past that is shared amongst these, you know.
And what's interesting, I didn't think about it before, but what's interesting is there's a number, I thought there were a number of connections between this story and this story in the Volsung saga, especially surrounding Brynhild. And so Brynhild, in some versions of that story, is the sister of Atli, the sister of the Huns. So you have that, again, there's another connection there with the Huns and that whole Mishigas, and this story. But anyway, so then there's a battle, the Huns and the Goths, as they go through Mirkwood Forest, which is an utterly unnoticed anywhere else name, which it's important that Mirkwood Forest is the dark and dangerous forest that exists between the Goths and the Huns, and that's how they end up fighting. Anyway, Angantyr has this daughter Hervör. Hervör is in charge of one of the fortresses out there. She's a warrior maiden, a shield maiden, and she falls in battle. It's very sad. And then that's sort of, once we've wrapped up the battle of the Goths and the Huns.
And this is a different Hervör. I just want to like point out, this is not the same Hervör who went into her dad's crypt at the beginning. Like we said, these names, like Angantyr came back, Heiðrek came back. This is a different Hervör who is a descendant of the original one.
Yeah, we'll call her Hervör the Second. So Hervör the Second dies, and then this sort of, that's kind of the end of the story. In some versions of the manuscript, the U versions, there's an epilogue that basically leads us through more begats and gets us to like Harald Finnhair and some of the other famous historical kings.
Which, if we ever want to do a deep dive into Scandinavian genealogical records and how sort of ites and all that goes, we could look at this again.
Yes. I actually
we could pick out all of the most boring sections of every saga and only read those for a whole month. It'll be great.
Yeah, I like this note I put in the part where it talks about the massive Hun army. I just wrote tons of Huns. Like, tons of Huns.
So something that I thought was interesting, at least in Tolkien's translation, he refers to them all as these phalanxes. And phalanx is not, like, the Hunnish army was a horseback army, it was a cavalry army. right? Like and it's fun because they do reference horn bows, and it's a term unique to this saga. So they do identify the Hunnish army by their unique bows, which as modern scholars, we know that the sort of Central European, Central Asian is the word I was looking for, Central Asian composite bow, the horse archer bow is a very unique and important innovation. It starts, early examples show up with the Scythians. We have the Hephalites, are sometimes called the White Huns. It spreads across Central Asia, and it appears in a bunch of different versions, but it was an incredibly powerful tool, and it was something that freaked the Romans out hardcore, because Parthians, right? There's another great example, the Parthian shot, which is when you ride your horse through battle and then whip around in the saddle and fire behind you. So you're getting the hell out of dodge while you're killing your enemies, which turns out Romans, not super cool with that. They were like, with the horses, I don't like it. Anyway, not really the point. The point is the horn bows.
Yeah, great weapon, actually. I think that it's the same type of bow as used by the Mongols in the 12th century to take over the whole world. And so it had so much more power in such a small package, you know. And so that's a weird thing I saw too, that they talk about when King Heiðrek talks about this battle that they're going to have after his daughter's been killed, and he goes and he musters his guys, and the Goths are all going to go out. They're going to have this big battle. They pick a space in the Danube area, and but it claims that they would historically mark out the battle with sticks, like a kind of like a Humgang, but a giant one. And I'm like, I wonder if they really did that at all. That seems like a weird thing, right? Because it says that he goes out with these what does it say? Hazel poles, and he marks the space, and as if the Huns are going to be like, well, shit, that's where the battle's going to be. Okay, we got to go over there, right? And I'm just like, that's not real, I bet.
The whole thing did kind of put me in the mind a little bit of an SCA war. Like, you have a defined battlefield, and then at the end of the day, when you're all tired, everyone goes back to their camps and they get some sleep, and then in the morning they come back and they fight some more, and then they go home and go to sleep. Presumably at night there's a lot of carousing and like wandering between campfires. So here we have a prototypical SCA war. Maybe there were merchants, I can't say. I would guess there were camp followers. I don't know if there was pottery or anything like that, but we can look for the war book to find out. So let's chat a little bit about the Tolkien connections. We talked about the mithril shirt, that magical light silken shirt.
I think that a definite connection, of course, is that Tolkien drew on those dwarven names for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. I've been looking up words. Can I just really fast? You mentioned the phalanxes, and so I went in and found the part where Christopher Tolkien has translated, I believe, translated the word fylking, 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 as phalanx, and just. Because I was like, what is that word actually mean? So Zoega says that fylking, or rather fylking armor, so the arm is the wing of an army. Fylki means district, county, shire in Norway. And fylking is a battle array or a host and legion.
Yeah, it's probably to that area though. Like you could say like this shire showed up and this is their fylking.
I wonder if it's related to the Old English word fyrd, which has a very similar meaning, where the fyrd of a particular hundred. So England is.
So the thing is, there is also the word fyrdar in fyrdar is it's actually a poetic term. It's masculine plural, men, warriors, is a poetic. So actually, you might be right on this, that because oftentimes poetic terms in Old Norse are just much older. Proto-Norse, Proto-Germanic words that have just sort of hung on in sort of their archaic form. So I don't think people were typically calling a host a fyrd, but that is a word in Old Norse too. And I don't know if it seems a little bit more of a stretch because it's fylk, and it gets so far away from it, but for instance, fylkeskonungur means chief of a district or a petty king. So it's this little, anyway, yeah. Sorry.
No, it's good. I think that he just chose phalanx because it probably sounded like easy for the people to understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you. I like that book there.
So it's descendant from Proto-Germanic folk, from folkas, meaning a crowd or army, and is related to Old English folk, which gives us our modern English folk. And you have, it's related to plebs, the Latin plebs, meaning the common people, through Proto-Indo-European word that I can't pronounce because it has one of those questionable laryngeals. So it comes from a root to fill, and now we're like way back down in there.
Questionable laryngeals is the name of my new progressive folk band.
Yeah.
Laryngeal theory is a trip, and like I buy into it. It makes sense, but we don't know how to pronounce it. It's just this big old like laryngeal too. Anyway, it's related to an Old Church Slavonic word and some Lithuanian stuff. There's Lithuanian for you, Kelly or Thorfinn. If you polkas means proud. So if you ever have to talk to those Lithuanian IT guys again, you can say thank you, polkas.
Let's hope in all I never have to again.
That's fair.
I mean, they're nice people, but it was like pulling teeth to get anything achieved.
So we've talked about the mithril coat. Obviously, Mirkwood Forest is like a direct lift. The riddles,
meaning dark.
Yeah,
like so riddles.
The Darkwood Forest, the riddles, which I personally like better than Gollum's riddles. But
some of them were dumb. Yeah. Sorry, there were so many riddles.
I know, it was like 10 pages. It was so like 10 pages of straight riddles, and I was just like,
I was having
my favorite one I was saying earlier is one where they're like, basically it might be, what I'm thinking is there's some interesting things going on in the manuscript, and how someone was like, my thought is someone who was rewriting a manuscript kind of was like, wait, that doesn't make any sense, and added in an element to one of the answers incorrectly, because the answer to like the riddle's like, there's a dead thing, but it's moving and it's on another dead thing, and we're going to use the terms for like horse. We're going to use yol, which is this old, again, another poetic term that comes from like Proto-Norse for horse, and like all these things. And probably just at the end of the day, it's just a kenning for the ice flow, because the answer to the riddle in the saga is a dead snake on top of a dead horse on top of an ice flow.
And they all floated down the river together.
Right, all floating down the river together. And I'm like, oh yeah.
When I read that riddle, I would have
like, come up with.
You got that out of that, right?
You're right. And so what it probably was is just a dead snake on an ice flow. But even then, what the hell? What is that? So many of these were like, oh, you're walking over a bridge, and so you're on a way, and then there's a way, the water going under you, and then the ways all around and above you, it's the birds flying, and you're just making this shit up.
What is a riddle anyway, except for making shit up? So really quickly on the riddles thing, before we go on to the rest of the Tolkien stuff, one of the riddles is sort of presumed to be an onion or a leek. It's a leek,
yes,
right? And the word
number 50, I think. I noted this one.
What strange marvel did I see without? In front of Delling's door, its head turning to hell downward, but its feet ever seek the sun. This riddle ponder.
So there's this. So the word lauker, which is how he translates it, means leek, but it has this sort of semantic range, pulling in all of the allium family. So leeks, onions, garlic, all this kind of stuff. And there's a very interesting tradition of garlic or onion or leek riddles The earliest one I was able to find was a Latin burn riddle. This is from an article, an unpublished article, Latin and Hebrew analogs to the Old Norse leek-riddle by Ulrich Hall. So I didn't find it, he found it. So there's a Latin riddle. I know. I found this article.
Word.
So that's
a thing that exists. Someone wrote an article on that. Right?
Somebody wrote an article on it. So anyway, there's this Latin riddle from northern Italy, 7th-ish century. I am brought forth, born from my mother with many layered clothing. I cannot have a body if I lose my clothing. I carry parents from whom I am born in my womb or stomach. I live, though interred in that place, I resume my life. And from that place, I resume my life. I can never grow up, nurtured to a great height, since nature makes my head go beneath and my shoots are the soles of my feet. A head go beneath my feet. So he connects this riddle, especially the use of the word head, to refer to the bulb, to the Old Norse riddle. And there's another one, my absolute favorite Old English riddle from the Exeter book, which is drawn from a 2nd century collection of Roman riddles, which is, what do you call something with 2 shoulders, 2 eyes, 2 sides, 2 legs, and 1,000 heads? Oh, sorry, 1 eye and 1,000 heads. It's a one-eyed seller of garlic. And it's a seller of garlic with only 1 eye. So he has 1,000 heads of garlic, or 999 heads of garlic, and he only has 1 eye. I think it's that kind of riddle where you're like, God damn it. It's the,
that's what I did too just now. I was like,
what?
Exactly.
That is the.
But what I like to imagine, and there's no evidence of this at all. Again, this is my conjecture. What I like to imagine is you've got these 2 Roman legionaries. They heard this riddle in the 2nd century. They pass it on. And then eventually a couple of guys are sitting around a fire, sort of maybe sub-Roman, maybe late Roman, in England. They've been sent to the limes of the empire. They're like, fuck this noise. They're sitting around this fire getting drunk on their watered down wine, and they're telling each other riddles. And one of them is this riddle about the one-eyed seller of garlic, and their Germanic house person or their Celtic house person is like, the fuck you say, and makes that exact same and then has to go home and tell it to other people to get them to make the face.
He's like, guys, you got to hear what I heard last night.
Like, it circulates in England or in Britannia, and then you have, the coming of the Angles and the Saxons and the Utes and all these guys, and eventually one of them tells these guys, and they're like, God, fuck, I hate that joke. And so then it circulates, and eventually it gets inscribed into the Exeter book. It's
like a super early dad joke.
It is primo dad joke material, right?
It's the original dad joke.
The dad joke, yes. So anyway, that's my little bit on leeks, riddles about onions and leeks. So
I gotta say, I'm never going to see any allium again, other than imagining like a little man with his head straight into the earth and his little feet sticking up. Every onion I see from now on is gonna be this little upside down man.
So then the Tolkien connection that I think gets the most comment on, obviously, is Hervör as Eowyn. So Hervör is this sort of prototypical proto-Eowyn, where Eowyn wants to live this life like the men. She wants to be a shield maid of Rohan. She wants to go to war, and she's constantly sort of blocked. And then, in Lord of the Rings, there's Wormtongue, and his like creeping on her, and she's like, I hate this life, right? My brother gets to go off and have these great adventures, and I'm stuck here taking care of my uncle who is failing in his health, fending off the advances of Wormtongue. My cousin, who was supposed to be king after, who would have been this great hero, has been slain by orcs. This is a shit life, right? And she sees the coming of Aragorn as this opportunity to break out, like once he releases Theoden. Once he releases Theoden from the spell and the workings, like this is the breath of fresh air that may free her to go do these things that she wants. But then her uncle, or is it her uncle or her brother? Anyway, one of the male, or is it Aragorn himself? One of them just shuts her down and is just like, no, this is your life is here. And then of course you have Theoden telling her, you have to guard the homestead.
Yeah, you have to take over in case I die.
Right. So she
you get to be
herself,
that son, you know, you're
the functional son.
Isn't the brother now in exile?
Yes.
And so he's essentially no longer a son.
One son's dead and the other is in exile.
Exile. So she becomes the sole heir.
But in that moment, she still doesn't get to become a warrior. So here you have Hervor, who's like, she's in the same boat. She is the functional son, but she's just like, I do what I want. And she goes off and she sort of lives Eowyn's dreams, maybe a little bit. Like there's less heroic in Hervor's early life.
Yeah, I would say Eowyn
not heroic at all. She's a villain.
Yeah. Hervor's a villain.
But you know, eventually she does kind of get to live this slightly less villainous life. She becomes the captain of these Vikings, and then, like Eowyn, returns to do her duty. Like her duty here, this very feminine duty, which is to produce sons, right? So Eowyn eventually, like in the halls of healing, she sees Faramir, who has always been looked over by everybody and has this, like, he's miserable. He sees Eowyn sees him, and it's a love match immediately because you have to do something with Eowyn, and she obviously can't marry Aragorn. So you're like, spare male, whom she is not related to. Perfect match. But then
But also he's great, so it was great.
Right.
I'm a big Faramir stan.
Yeah, he's a great character, especially in the books.
Yeah.
But
anyway, she sets, like Hervor, she sets aside these warlike ambitions and is just like, okay. I mean, she doesn't immediately take up embroidery, but she.
Interesting commonality too is that when she does become a warrior, she disguises herself as a man enough to be unrecognizable as not a man.
Yeah.
And so to go into the host of the Rohirrim and be one of the Rohirrim, and they just thought absolutely that's the case.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not till she reveals herself that we find out that she's actually a woman. So she does successfully assume that Father idea you guys were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so like Eowyn, it's that when she transgresses against what's assumed about her is when she can do the thing. She transgresses, and by transgressing, she breaks the prophecy. So the prophecy with the Witch King is that no man can kill him. So she whips off her helmet and she says, I am no man. And then there's also the Hobbit. Let's please not forget his contribution. He is also not a man, but he is a Hobbit. Right. Like, so there's that. But then here in this story, Hervor is told no maiden can grasp this sword. And then her father identifies her not as maiden, but barely human-like at this point. She has bounced back and forward between what's his name? Hervar there, and Hervor enough that she sort of now exists in this in-between where she is neither maiden nor warrior. She's sort of like whatever she wants to be. And so here she's like, I can take the sword if I want to, because you know,
she's like, I do what I want.
Exactly. Full on do what I want mode.
You know, I think kind of a thing that Tolkien really, and I'm talking about J.R.R.R. He really relies on is these weapons of great power. A lot of times come with a price, right?
Yeah.
And so, like Tyrfing, if you use Tyrfinger, right, you're going to be successful, but you're also going to have something really awful happen, right? Same thing with the ring, right? The ring is you'll have massive power, but the ring will corrupt you and ultimately destroy you, right? And so while you have that great power, you are also being manipulated by the evil and the curse of these kind of great magics. And I think that that's something that he definitely draws from the sagas on, you know, Same thing with like dragons' treasures and things like that. There's like a curse on the dragon's treasures in Beowulf, and those type of ideas.
Volsunga Saga has a dragon's treasure that has
right.
a ring that is cursed.
Exactly, which is it makes you wonder where he got that idea, right? But yeah, so I mean, I think that there's definitely the idea that these things will give you something, but you're going to pay a great price to have them. And and it's gonna, and that's it's unlike Excalibur, right? Which Excalibur, you just get Excalibur and you kind of win. Right?
Yeah.
I got the sword done, right? And so I would like to point out there was also some other cool shit I thought I really liked. There's a part where at the barrows, which also Tolkien uses barrows, and there's a place where you get magic swords. The hobbits all get swords from the elf kingdoms there from the First Age, which are like basically magic weapons, right? From barrows where the dead warriors are buried, right? But when the guy Heiðrek, what was his name? Angantyr, her father, right? He comes out and it runs through some really cool kind of kennings, which I thought they weren't common in the rest of the poem. But then there was one part where there's he's talking about how the sword is a hater of mail coats. I think that's a really cool one. I think a hater of mail coats, peril of bucklers is that it's a peril because it just chops shields up. Bane of Hjalmar. So it's also that alone says what the sword is. It's Hjalmar's bane, and I really liked those. And here's like the sun's curtain. It talks about there's some really fun kennings in this part. Yeah, I always like to see those, and and that was a fun part.
Yeah, no, so the Hjalmar's bane is the one that really stuck with me, and it was such like I don't know if either of you guys in your fighting have named your swords, but I liked to, and so the sword that I currently have is called Langsamer Götterfunken, which translates from the German as the very slow static electricity of the gods. Because it's slow, but sometimes it comes in and packs a punch. Like it'll get there eventually. But yeah,
I don't normally. I name my Dane axes for SCA fighting.
Awesome.
I like one of them was called in Old Norse was Disturber of the Peace, and the other one was Battle Phantom, and I would write them down. Yeah, and I think I made one for Fiach and Antir that was Bad Neighbor. So
I just like in my head, Hjalmar's Bane is such a good sword name. Like something about that is just like there's so much story built into that but it's so short, right? Like Hjalmar's Bane, and you're like, well, what, how, why, what, right? Like I just that one.
So Hjalmar was important.
Yes, well, there's that too. And then the last connection that I saw with Tolkien was pretty dumb. But the trip to Samsi, which is this fire evil island, right? So in Lord of the Rings, they're going to Mordor, and Boromir is like, no man can walk. You cannot simply walk into Mordor, right? Yeah. You can literally not simply walk into Samsi because it's an island.
You gotta stay out there, yeah.
Like that's a pretty dumb connection, but maybe a little bit of Samsi Mordor. I don't know.
I mean, definitely throwing in Mirkwood too was, but I think that's Christopher Tolkien here doing that is, as at least he took his father's work and really just there was so much information that he didn't ever publish, that Christopher Tolkien was taught since he was a little boy, right? Because even if you look at Tolkien's work like Letters from Father Christmas, every year he would write a story and mail it or fake mail it to the kids from Father Christmas, and he would read it, and Tolkien would even illuminate the edges with little pictures and stuff. And this is where you start to see things like, this is where the first drawing of what later on becomes that red drawing of Smog, that was in Letters from Father Christmas. Elves are like elves in Lord of the Rings though in it, and even orcs show up if I remember correctly. So I mean, if you're looking at these things, it was like him reading these little adventure stories every year to the kids at Christmas time, and that was while he was working on The Hobbit and and Lord of the Rings at the same time. And so he's Christopher Tolkien's basically been immersed in this world since he was a little kid, and massive scholar in it, right? And a contributor, very strong contributor to the kind of the continued mythology of that world. But yeah, I think that these type of things, he obviously threw that in there as kind of a homage, right?
I think the original Old Norse it starts with Mörk, and then whatever the Old Norse for woods is. So it's a bit of a homage, but it's also like a fairly literal translation of the Old Norse.
I'm trying to find where they mention Mirkwood. Can you even tell me the
49, I think, is where he mentions it.
What 49?
Yeah.
It's in the description of the battle between the Huns and the
tons of Huns.
Tons of Huns. Okay. I'm gonna read. Where is Mirkwood? You said
the renowned forest named Mirkwood.
Mirkvider. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Woods. Vider is just wood. So it's not even Mirk Forest.
Yeah.
It's specifically wood.
So I mean, clearly we know Tolkien was a scholar of all this, and this is not. Whether or not he lifted it directly from this saga, or he came up with it and then was like, oh look, here it appears in another saga. I don't know, but
if you just start reading the legendary sagas specifically, if you read the legendary sagas with an eye for names and like place names, people's names, things like that. I mean, going through the Poetic Edda alone, like when you're looking at Völuspá, the first one, the sayings, the speech of the Volva, the Cirrus, she lists like all of the names of the dwarves, the names of the dwarves, as like Gandalf, Thorin, Durin, Dvalin, like all the same names. Like,
he does.
Like literally, he just went and looked at the list of names. It was like, I like that one, and when I like that one, I think I'll take that one too.
Yeah, I have a book series. It's a 2-book description of the making of The Hobbit. So what they finally did is a guy went into Tolkien's the library. And Tolkien was a weird guy in the sense that he wasn't really an author, you know what I mean? He had written things, but he wasn't like a trained writer. And so when his editor would say things like, hey, this part doesn't work or whatever, instead of just fixing that part, Tolkien would just rewrite the whole damn book, right? And so there was all these variations that they had. And so this guy finally got to go in and hands-on, and he started going through, and it talks about how Gandalf wasn't actually Gandalf originally. Gandalf was named Thorin, and Smaug was a really a Jormungandr type name, one of these kind of really real Norse dragon names that you see kind of throughout the thing. And over time, what it does, it goes through and as things change, they explain, but it takes 2 whole books this guy wrote to describe each one of them. By the way, is longer than The Hobbit.
Tolkien was like the particular kind of historical linguist because he only wrote any of that so that he could have a justification for his conlang.
Right. Kind of.
Right. Like he was like, no, I'm devising a language, and every language has cultural influences and history and mythology behind it. Otherwise, it's like the language, you're missing things. Like you can't just make up a language and have no culture that the language exists. Right. Then he creates a culture and a world and mythology and gods and a creation story, and there's all these different factions, and then he's like, oh, and this story, Lord of the Rings, that I'm telling, it's actually me, a scholar, doing what I do for fun anyway, which is translating old documents and manuscripts. I'm just translating this manuscript I found from Westron into something that English speakers can understand, which is why they all have Old English and Old Norse names, because it's supposed to be like their names aren't even really like Bilbo is Bilba, that he's like, I changed it to an O so that it made sense to English readers to be a masculine name. It's like, you didn't need to make Bilba be the name you didn't have to do that. You're the one, you made it all up. You could have just
exactly.
not.
You invented all this, bro.
Yeah.
People have asked me like why I love Tolkien so much and why I'm just like, I love these books. And the answer is that given my druthers, like if I had all the money in the world and I didn't have to work or anything like that, that's what I would do, is just play with languages, create my own languages. And then naturally, once you have like the structure of a language, you've got to, in order to build vocabulary, in order to build all this, you have to have a story to explain it, the culture. Like that is, this is a game I used to play with myself when I was a kid, was I would draw an island and then I would populate the island with cities and then like write this whole story about how, like the government of the island, and this is what the island's flag looks like, and this is the kind of languages they speak. And like, this is me at 12. This was the kind of nerd that I was, right? Like,
I'm vibing with you so hard. I did very similar.
You know, I mean, I did too, but what really led me to do that was like, I don't know if I would have done it on my own, probably, but it was like Dungeons and Dragons, really, you know, because I had read The Hobbit already by the time I was like 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of thing was ingrained. My father used to tell me Norse myths too when I was a little kid, right? He'd tell me about that stuff because he was very fiercely proud that our family's Danish, you know, and he would be like, you're going to learn this kind of shit, you know, and it was funny that so that kind of stuff was always ingrained in me, and it wasn't until I kind of had an outlet like Dungeons and Dragons where I started again populating whole countries and coming up with, you know, roads and names of rivers and all that kind of junk, and you know, and like these guys are fighting these guys and all that kind of stuff. That is a really cool and I mean really fucking nerdy thing to do is to make up little worlds and like populate them in your own head. I would do this when, at home by myself, because like, you know, so that way I could talk about it later on with my friends when we played D&D. And
I still think my mom like has this large poster that I drew of like a full map of like this one like continent that I like really got fixated on for a while, that I created, and I didn't know how to name the continent, so I just looked at a keyboard, and so the name of the continent was Quawesdr. That's how I decided it was pronounced. And if you look at a keyboard and you start at Q and you just go up and down, Quawseder.
Yeah.
That was how I named that island, that continent, and that was
as good as any other.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of islands are like you know.
Really so I will tell one more story, and then I'm going to go on to talk about Hervör and gender, because that was what I was really I had a little moment about earlier. So in college, I took a class called environmental sociology, and this was like, I needed a sociology credit, and this was the only available class, right? So this class, it was fascinating, but it really wasn't my jam. And one of the assignments we were given, we were supposed to, like, we got given sort of a map, and we were supposed to explain how the interplay between the geography of this map and the environments depicted thereon and the societies. And she wanted like 2 pages, right? Like just a real brief sketch. I show up with 45 pages, including a lineage of the kings of this island and their intermarriage with kings from another island, including a timeline of its history going back like 400 years. Like I set down this short novelette, and I'm just like, here is the thing. And I've got the different regions, I've got flags for the different regions, I've got their different sort of customary clothing described. Like it was the most fun on a college assignment I've had in a long time, and I'd had in a long time. And she just looks at me and she's like, 2 pages. And I'm like, just read the top sheet, dude. Like there's 2 pages. Literally. Like there's a 2-page summary, like executive summary, and then there's all my supporting data. So just read the summary, you're fine. And she's just looking at me, she's like, what is like, was not.
I love that.
Like it was the best. So Hervör and gender. Hervör, her name, is shared with the name one of the Valkyrie from the Völundarkvida. It literally kind of means battle readiness or warrior's awareness. Her coming from army host or retinue of warriors. Vor means caution or warning. And so it's interesting, Hervor, because it's this shared name with this Valkyrie, Valkyries have this sort of liminality. They act as what's called a psychopomp, the escorter of the dead. And so they cross between the world of the living and the world of the dead, right? They go down to the world of the living, they select the dead, they take them back up, or wherever, up, around, through the barrier, who knows. So just her name alone provides her with a certain amount of this sort of shared liminality. And then you have Seether, which we've talked about before, this magical, this sort of magical thing. And it's in one of the articles that I found, it really, they focus on Seether as a transformative power. So transforming the present into the future, when we're talking about Odin as a Seether practitioner, Odin physically transforms himself into all sorts of things. And then Hervor doesn't transform herself from human to creature, but she transforms herself from outwardly presenting as female to outwardly presenting as male, and then back again. And she also kind of transforms herself into a creature or not quite human, like her father did. So her father has the same sort of, like, he goes berserk, and berserkers, we've talked about, have that sort of monstrosity. So she doesn't really reach fully into monstrosity, but when her father sees her in the Hervar Kviða, he sort of doesn't quite identify her as human. He calls her not quite human. And so tied in with Seether, there's this whole idea of magical reality. So I just wanted to talk about magical reality. So as modern readers, we tend to read magic as separate from religion and something that clearly identifies a magic, like a fantastical account, right? Like we talk about these as the legendary sagas because they in part deal with magic and all that kind of stuff. But really, that's not quite correct for the Norse world or the medieval world, right? Like there's a notion that magic sort of exists contemporaneously with human life. Yes, and then later, even with Christianity, right? Like the mass is a magical experience. Clerics have magical powers. And if you want to really get into that part, when we talk about early Western or medieval Western versions of fortune telling and all that kind of stuff, that's largely preserved through the church, through priests. It's prognostication. There's the word I'm looking for. So the early, yes, you have my binder. So the early Old English prognostication manuals are all preserved through church manuscripts. So magic here. It's magic, but it's not separate from religion. It's not separate from the sort of world of normality. It's part of the world. Yes, there's my binder. Yield prognostication. So it's important to keep in mind that for the people consuming these stories, magic wasn't like magic didn't separate the reality from unreality. It was simply an aspect that should be expected, right? Like maybe you'd never seen magic occur in real life unless you went to mass and all that kind of stuff. But your cousin saw it for sure, right? Like it was unremarkable. So in this existing world of magic and transformation, you have Hervor transforms into Hervarthr, specifically in preparation for the supernatural encounter at Samsi. Well, not specifically, but in preparation for the supernatural encounter at Samsi. So she leaves behind this life as Hervor, who is warlike and who commits violence, and she passes into the world of Hervarthr, who then becomes a Viking and goes roving with these Vikings. And that's an acceptable form of this kind of violence. Like there's no shame on her for that, or shame on Hervarthr. And then eventually she becomes a captain. Hervarthr becomes the captain of this group. So like not only has he successfully become a Viking, but now he's super Viking, as I think I've already said once.
He's like good
now I've lost myself in my notes. And what's interesting is when she leaves, she goes to her mother and she says, "Mother, prepare me as you would any son, and kit me out," and all this kind of stuff, which is kind of like, is she going to her mother to do, well, her father's dead, so I guess she couldn't go to him, but there's a certain amount of like, you return to your mother and you are reborn as Hervarar, right? Like it's not stated, but like this maternal figure sends you out into the world.
Yeah, and it's in the Tolkien translation. It speaks specifically to her getting like mail and clothing of a man too. So like when she says "kit me out," I mean she literally is like top to bottom now, transformed everything into a man.
Right. Unlike with like, for instance, Brynhildr, who as soon as the Bernie was cut off, it's like, oh, this is a woman. I see what's going on here. Like, yeah, Hervar is like wearing the full, even out of armor.
She's like, her underclothes and everything are that of a man as well. And so that was interesting to mention that. Yeah.
So she's done this switch once, and now she gets to Samsi and she does the switch back, and she announces herself, and this sort of this authority over herself to electively swap back and forth kind of gives her this, it's a mastery over herself. And because she has mastered herself, she can then master the dead. Like she can expand that authority over the dead. So she gets to Samsi and she says, other dead, go back to your graves, and father, come to speak to me. And she explicitly calls her father forth and says, and treat with her. And it tends to take a fairly aggressive set of language. So Maybund, who is the author for whom I am indebted for most of this discussion, says Hervor's aggressive threat of working a violent spell turns her into the supernaturally empowered projector of destruction and leads her into yet another dimension with the magic and the intergender continuum. So she's passing like on her own power, passing herself back and forward through this, what would typically be considered a fairly, no, it's not, right? But it's for men, it's a fairly rigid, like men don't want to fall into Blauther. Like men are constantly striving to stay in Hvater. Women can stretch into Hvater, but there's less shame and falling back into Blauther because that's sort of their natural state, right? So for here, here she's electively choosing like which end of that spectrum she's going to be on. And then Angantyr, like I said, doesn't see her as quite human-like. He says, Kvethkat ekthik marung monomlika. I declare you not maiden human-like. And Bersi, you can check my translation.
Where? Sorry.
No, it's all right.
I would like to be able to see it with my eyes, and I don't know what page.
Is this the part where no, that's where he's saying no woman would take the sword. I'm a little bit behind you, I think.
Yep, no, you're good. Wake Angantyr, Hervor wakes you. Angantyr answers. This might be a chunk that's not in.
Yeah.
That's not in the Tolkien translation.
Right. And and thanks for giving me this one, by the way.
Yeah.
It was a good read.
Yeah, I can send you. I'm sorry, it's in. I think it's in my article.
That's all right.
Which is in one of these piles.
I was. Can I just mention while you find that I was just making some connections that I hadn't previously of just like the role in which say the feminine magic we're talking about, and how much seeresses have connections with the chthonic, the raising of the dead and talking to the dead and asking them questions. And you see that sort of motif of like, we need to, I mean, if you've ever read Greek stuff, you know how many times you have to bring poor old blind Tiresias back to ask him questions. This is a very similar deal, except usually Odin is running around asking all these. Odin is running around doing Seidr to raise seeresses from the dead and then asking them questions. Here we've got again, like it's unclear, like she seems to just kind of come into the grave and then people are talking to her. And so like it doesn't seem to me, unless I missed it, it didn't seem like she like did anything to like raise them specifically, but she does have this like, other than like speaking to them and just like, I'm calling you forward, which very well could be the like, sorry, my brain is, I'm processing this as I'm saying it. But this connection between the feminine magic and raising things from the dead.
Hey, so Bersi, I was watching this thing on YouTube, which was a scholar talking about a particular grave dig, which was of a seether practitioner. And in it, they found that she had eaten like these balls of wax that were filled with human ashes, and she had like 30 of them in her stomach. And they think maybe that could be also what killed her. But no, I wonder if this is part of, you know what I mean? Like you said, like the feminine connecting with the dead is maybe part of that. I wondered because I was like, why would you do that, right? Because you said the seeresses are oftentimes calling up the dead, and I think that's kind of a common myth.
Right. There's a connection, and like this is definitely things that like you end up getting cross-cultural studies and stuff going on, of like what is up with like femininity, the realm of the dead, and like caves and the interment in the earth, and like the deepness, the darkness, like the soil, being inside the earth, like ideas about like the womb of the earth, the women, and like things are dead, but also women being the bearers of life. There's like all these different, and it depends on what culture we're talking about and what time period. And I don't know even enough about specifically like what is going on with the connection here. And but I find it really super interesting, like that these themes, these motifs keep kind of repeating themselves.
I was talking to Kinehild about this the other night, about how it is weird that some of the gods, like you said, Odin is a practitioner, and and he is like the ultimate like man god, right? He's the warrior. He's like the warrior cult god, and he's doing a feminine magic.
Not only is he doing a feminine magic, but he's already, and I think I've touched on this in the past, but like Odin actually has much more of a sort of liminal gender. I think Odin and Hervör have a lot in common in terms of their like weird gender presentations. One of the things that has been argued in terms of different ways that different sort of emasculation symbols, obviously cutting off someone's beard is emasculating, but gouging out one or both of their eyes also seems to be very much linked with masculinity. Your eyes as like a source and a sort of there's you can look at things like oh gosh, which king was it? King Harold, when he was in the Varangian Guard. There's a scene in which Emperor Maximilian gets his eyes gouged out, which is attested in the Byzantine sources, who did it and why, and they did it because of like this idea of like your power coming out of your eyes. But like the Vikings recontextualize it to make it make sense as like it's still a power thing to gouge out his eyes, but it's like emasculating because it always ends up in other sagas also like being at the same time as like they're shouting insults at them, gouging out their eyes, and cutting off their beards. And so it's been argued that Odin gouging out his own eye doing
emasculation
is a halfway emasculating thing for him. And then he's performing Seither, and he uses that eye to like, he puts it in Mimir's well, and now has these prophetic abilities, which again was usually, that's what seeresses do. That's what women who do Seither who do.
Do you think that him basically hanging himself and dying ties in with that as well, with the kind of idea that he's gone into both worlds?
He definitely,
like you were saying earlier, where like a seether practitioner can see into the other world because of this kind of feminine idea. Maybe that's kind of a connection there, is that with him self-sacrificing himself and the emasculation of himself, that could be why there's like a obscure gender kind of presentation with him.
He definitely has his foot sort of like in both worlds in like many different ways. He's definitely really, involved with like death and other, like this afterworld, afterlife, and he's like really weird. He's supposed to be like a warrior king type god, if we want to go with Dumezil, who I hate. But he's like the worst king. Like he's not what you would actually want. He's so crafty and tricky. He's constantly he's untrustworthy. Like in many ways he's like fine because he's like a warrior, he does all the great things, but like he doesn't seem to be very generous. He doesn't like hit all these ideas of like what is an amazing king, and you would think that the king of the gods would be that, but no, actually the king of the gods, because he's so powerful and because he's got this special position, he's allowed to like break all the rules, and so he does constantly. Is just
he's also kind of a dick, really. I mean, he is not really like you wouldn't want to worship that guy.
No,
right? All he does is like he really wants to, like in other like sources, he's talking about how he's trying to turn princes against each other, and he's trying to do these things. So he's got his fingers in all these like different ways that he's manipulating people, so that way he can draw more people to his army for the battle at the end of time. That's all he really cares about. Right? So he's like, be in the warrior cult so you die, right? And that's like, so he's not a very good representative of the average person. Like nobody would like, I mean, you'd be like kind of you'd probably make sacrifice to Odin if you had to, but it was more like, I don't really want to give a lot of his attention aimed at me, right? Like Thor is pretty dumb and kind of like a dude, right? He goes around and he fucks around, and
he's the people's man.
He's just like, what's up, guys? Woo! And that's, I could drink a whole ocean, I don't care. I can eat 4 bulls, right? And everyone's just like, yeah, right. But he's like you see what you get, right?
Right. He's a big strong.
He hangs out with humans.
Thor's a himbo who will take care of you.
Yeah.
And Odin is not.
He wants to fuck you up.
Pretty scary.
Yeah. And so I mean, I think that that, and of course the idea of like local gods would have been really, that's who you mostly, I think, would spend your time like worshiping.
Local
the
gods,
rock,
family gods,
the big rock, the trees over there, and the river, right? Those are your main gods, right?
They actually mentioned the Disir in this story too. One of the women goes and dies, or one of the Hervors dies in the house of the Dis, and it's noted in the thing. It's really weird that it's actually singular, like in each of the 3 manuscripts we've talked about. Instead of Disir, usually it's these plural feminine sort of household spirits that live on like a farm. This like, it's very like they're like, it's just one, and usually they're sort of worshipped in plural. It's like all of them, and so it might be that actually she died in like a goddess's hof or temple, but they just sort of put in a different word. Anyway, that they mentioned the Disir here, which is not usual.
So I think the answer is that it doesn't get preserved in the Tolkien manuscript. So I'll have to send you this article, which I think you'll find really interesting anyway. And you can see the text there. But where was I? So Angantyr says no maiden can grasp the sword, but because Hervor's been bouncing back and forward between these statuses, she's like, I do what I want, and she takes it. And there's an interesting, so I mentioned earlier the connection with sort of Brynhildr. Here again, you have a little bit of that Volsung Saga connection, because there's all these flames guarding the sword, and Angantyr explicitly says, look, if you take this sword, bad things will happen, much like Sigurður was told by his uncle previously. If you go after this maiden, bad things she will be your doom. This will be bad things. So same kind of like magical relative, speaks prophecy, hero does not care, takes the thing anyway. So
my note says, you don't want cursed sword for reals.
Yeah.
For real.
And she tries repeatedly, or he tries repeatedly to tell her, she just doesn't care. So after she takes Tyrfing, they travel to Guðmundar's hall. And what's interesting is Guðmundar's hall, so it doesn't get hit on much in this saga, but in other sagas, it pops up. So Guðmundar as the king pops up in a couple of other places. One author, Davison, connects Guðmundar's territory with the sort of land of the not dead. So we're still in this weird liminal space, right? Other authors just put it in the far north, beyond which is only the dead. So it's in this sort of magical realm. The only way to get through it is to pass through shadows and all this kind of stuff. It's if it's in the far north, presumably the Scandinavians know that the farther north you go, the harder it is to get things to grow. So it's not a fertile country, right? Like, and if it's not fertile, it's kind of dead. And none of the authors that I read talked about that, but as somebody who lives in the north, I can tell you, if not a lot grows there, not a lot grows there.
And it's easy to die there, I would presume.
Yeah. So she goes up to Guthmunder's hall. This is where sort of she lives in the hall for a while. She serves in his army. And one day he's playing, and Tolkien translates it as chess, but I'm assuming it's more like Nafatoffel.
It's in the thing, it's just says Toffel,
Okay.
which can be any board game.
Okay.
You may be familiar with Hnefatoffel, which is the much closer to like chess game that lots of people are like, oh yeah, Hnefatoffel, but Toffel is just the word that's used here.
It just means table,
just
doesn't it?
any board game.
It just means table, right?
Or board.
Does it mean board or table? Yeah, it's kind of like that same idea.
I don't know. It's probably related to table. Toffel, table sounds right.
Yeah.
So while you're looking at that, so she goes off, she does a little bit more Viking, eventually gets sort of sick of it. This is also where the stranger pulls Tyrfing and she chops off his head.
Right.
So eventually she gets sick of it, sets it aside. But then sort of the last time we see her in the story, she's in another Brunhilder-like role where she is empowering this young warrior with a new special toy. Not new to anybody, it's Tyrfing again. So, but the young warrior, her son Heiðrek is getting Tyrfing, and she kind of teaches him about it, much like Brunhild teaches Sigurður when they first meet. And then he goes off on his own adventures. So Hervör, she is such an interesting character because she just bounces back and forward through these different, like, she presents herself only as she wants to. And at the end, right, like somebody catches on and realizes what's going on. But she electively, it's like, this is all her agency. She does what she wants and nobody can tell her otherwise. So I thought she was pretty cool.
In the text I have, it talks about when she goes to Goodman's Hall, that she presents herself as Hervard again, and it's 100% believable. Like, they're like, behave like any warrior, it says, and they're just like, oh, another warrior, Hervard. And it's not until she kind of settles in, really, that that transformation back to Hervard happens, right? And so it's interesting. I was like, you're right that the whole transmutive ability of her to go from one thing to another is it's kind of like, it's also kind of magical. That's why she can probably, like you said, take the magic sword and walk into the fire and call out the ghosts and do all those type of things, because she's in a half world position,
and this is something that, like, oddly enough, you see berserkers can just do things, or people who are related to berserkers, even, like, because obviously we never have a section where Hervör actually like goes berserk or does anything like that, but is like in this family of berserkers, and for some reason they just have like
they're touched,
the steel to just go and do whatever they want. I found Toffel, interestingly enough, so like Zoega has it as a board game. It's singular, but they have here tables. Interestingly, there's no other entry here that has Toffel that involves anything other than board games and board game pieces. Like, there's no other translation where it's like, it just means table. So they weren't calling it was probably board for table, right? Just like in Scandinavian, Scandinavian languages, right? Like board, smorgasbord, right?
Do you think they could have had special, like, small tables with legs for playing these games, like a raised piece?
It seems to be that they were not. They were boards with the pieces on top of them, and Toffel can refer to like the whole game or just the board, and then you can have like specific names for like the pieces. Tafla is like a piece. And then here's a fun word that I just want to give to everyone who plays D&D and you have those bags full of dice. I would say dice are game pieces, right? So if you want to call your bag of dice an Old Norse name, the term Taffelpungur, so Taffelpungur means game bag.
Yeah, that like game pouch.
Yeah, game pouch.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
there you go.
It's purple and it's got Crown Royal written on it.
Exactly. There you go. That's what I was imagining.
So just we've been going for 2 hours now, so I want to say one more thing and then we should probably wrap up. And the one thing is Toffel is related to English table and they're both descended from Latin, actually, tabula. So it's a very old borrowing from Latin.
And that's why you would normally say board for everything else.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Latin means a plank or a board or a slate kind of object. So it's got a pretty broad semantic range. It can also mean a map, a painting, a document, a tablet, like a wax tablet. It's got a whole bunch of interesting little uses. And in English, eventually it came to mean table. And obviously for the Old Norse, it was just the thing you put on the table to put your little pieces on, have a good time.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've been at this for 2 hours and I think we could probably keep going, but also I know we've all got lives that we need to get to.
I have no life, man.
That's fair. I know I have to go. I have like an appointment to pick up my groceries and all that kind of good stuff. So
Guys, I want to say thank you for allowing me to come into your little world and play in it for a while. I really appreciate it. It was super fun, and trusting me to hopefully, I hope I brought something to the.
No, I think you did a great.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us.
That's where I was going to go. Is thank you very, very much for giving us your time. I was very happy to have you. I was a little nervous this morning. I'm like, I don't want to let Thorfinn down. But I know, there's a lot of anxiety.
You guys are great.
So just let it go. But thank you so much, both of you. And thank you to our audience and everyone have a great day.
Yeah. See ya.